Hi everyone, Yvonne here tonight we're going to be talking about anxiety and fear. And the reason I'm talking about this is because a lot of my clients who come to me have various forms of this disorder, if you like. We all have and suffer from fear at times. Mostly when we enter a situation which is unknown to us, which we haven't entered before, or if we overthink about things that are going to happen, that we have planned to do, or places we plan to be, and actions we intend to carry out that maybe are new to us or that we haven't done before in the past. The brain, everyone's brain, is hardwired to protect us, hardwired for survival. And when we're born as babies, we only have two fears. Every other fear is a learned response. The two fears that we have as babies are fear of falling and fear of loud noise. Every other fear we have in our lives is learned. We've learned it from observing somebody else in a situation, or from picking up the fear that our parents have about different things. For example, my parents never swam, and in fact they didn't really like water all that much. So even though we were brought to the seaside as children, the most my parents ever did was paddle in the sea. So thanks to anyone who's joining me. Thanks for joining me. And if you have any questions, as always, you can ask me throughout. Put them in the comments below here. And if I have time at the end, I will get to your questions. But the reason I'm talking about this is because it's very, very real for people in their lives. And it affects a lot of people. And when, like everything else, fear happens when we, let's say, face a situation that we are not used to, that is new to us, and that we don't know how we're going to actually deal with, because we've no past experience of it, or perhaps we have a past experience of it and it didn't go too well, and we equate that reaction to what's going to happen in the future. So most of the time we enter anxiety because we future pace, if you like, our ability to cope. We future pace our ability to cope. That's important. Based on our past experiences, based on what others have told us about us, based on our thoughts and our beliefs. So fear in itself is a cognitive process. And by that I mean our brain, and this isn't something we consciously do, but our brain, because of its it has four primal instincts in it that are there to help us survive. And they are the 4 F's, as I call them: the fight, flight, freeze, and faint. They're the 4 F's that we will enter if all else fails, if we absolutely freak out in a situation. And they are primal to us because in times eons ago, gone past, they were what the body automatically went into in extreme dangerous situations where we were being attacked, or where we were feeling trapped, or it's basically the body's inbuilt mechanism for coping with situations. And if we don't have a clear cognitive way of coping with anxiety when it comes up, and anxiety is very much emotional based, it's not about the brain. Anxiety comes up when we're in a situation and we feel uncomfortable, we feel fearful. And that's what anxiety is. It's the emotional reaction of the body to what we perceive to be a dangerous situation that we're in. And that could be that we're on stage giving a talk for the first time. That could be that we're standing up, reading in front of people for the first time, or going in to meet a whole new staff, for example, where you're starting a new job or something like that, or going to a meeting with your boss for the first time where you know change is afoot and you're going to be given new duties or new orders or new directions, and you're fearful about that. And so anxiety is the body's way of bringing up feeling the fear. And its purpose is there. It's there for our positive purpose, because if we didn't know what fear was, and we had none, if we had no fear, if we were fearless like Evel Knievel or somebody like that, then we're going to enter into dangerous situations and we're not even going to be warned. So anxiety is a warning system. The body has inbuilt into it. But when it becomes our go-to response, that's when it becomes an issue in our lives. Most people facing, maybe public speaking or going into water, like I had a huge fear of drowning in water, and found it very difficult to overcome that fear. But the only way I overcame it was by actually becoming cognitive about it. And that means being aware and thinking it through, not allowing myself to go into fight, flight, freeze or faint, and instead taking control of my thinking about the given situation that I was in. I wanted to learn how to swim, for example. So I kept telling myself, it's not logical that I'm going to drown. Look at all the other people in the pool. None of them have drowned. It's about putting logic into your response. And it's about the difference between reaction and response. Now, I started by talking about fear and our four primal instincts. And they are there in extreme circumstances to keep us safe. But they're not there to be used every day of our lives. It is when we have repeated situations where we enter a fearful state that our brain becomes patterned with that response. And so that becomes our go-to way of dealing with it, or not dealing with it, as the case may be. I hope this is making sense to you. Now, it's not always something that you can voluntarily control yourself. If it becomes a big issue for you, if it becomes that you can't breathe, for example, or you can't, you feel you have palpitations, or you start to sweat, these are all responses, emotional responses to the fear. And that's what's called anxiety. The person who is been given the cognitive way to deal with anxiety will be able to put the situation they're in into perspective. They'll be able to think clearly about it and realize that the chances of what they're fearing happening is very small. But if your brain has had repeated incidences where you've had that fight, flight, freeze, faint response activated over and over in your life, then it becomes your go-to, and it becomes what the body goes to because it knows nothing else. And it will automatically kickstart the anxiety. You won't have a choice. It'll automatically kickstart that anxiety in you, and your emotional responses will become out of control. So it's important, if you have recognized this about yourself, that you have anxiety and that it's taking control of you rather than you taking control of it, then the only way to deal with that is to do CBT therapy, in my opinion, because I'm trained in CBT and I work with clients in relation to cognitive behavioral therapy. And that is where we basically break down the whole fear, anxiety, vicious circle. We take out the fear, we look at it, we make logical sense of it, and many other exercises that we do in CBT, and that allows you to gain control of your mind's reaction. Now, if you are in a very dangerous situation, then your body will automatically enter one of the four primal instincts that we have to keep us safe. And that is normal, and it is great that that happens, because if it didn't happen, you would have no fear, and you wouldn't know the difference between being safe and not being safe, and you wouldn't be able to take steps to protect yourself in that situation. For example, the other thing I want to say about the brain is we are manifestors. So everything we think will happen, we can actually manifest by thinking it. So if we constantly think about, oh, I'm going to probably fall off that stage or faint when I start talking in front of that audience at this event that I know I have to do, or that I've agreed to do, or whatever, then you can actually, by thinking about that in advance, manifest it into reality, and it will actually happen to you. So we have to be very cognitive, aware of what our thought pattern is. If we continually think the same thing over and over and over, it actually becomes a belief that we have about ourselves. So if we continually think, oh, there's no way I could do that, I'd faint if I went up there. Suppose you're watching someone giving a speech in front of a big audience, or something similar, like whatever you fear. Think about what you say when you would be looking at that, because that's the thinking that will make it happen if you ever have to get up on stage. So we have to be very aware and conscious of our thought patterns around our fears, because we can actually make them happen. And I'll give you an example of that. And that is when I was about, I had 4 sisters. I'm the youngest, the baby. That's me. But I had 4 sisters. And the first sister, my eldest sister, was the first to get married in the family. So this was the first wedding I was ever at where I was actually part of the people who would be up the front of the church. And to me, as a child of, I don't know what I was, 12 or something, when she got married, I had never been, like in those days, there was altar rails, and going beyond inside the altar rails was a huge thing. It was only the priest that was ever allowed to do that. And so as a child, this whole concept of being up there on the altar in front of everybody in the church was huge to me. And I thought to myself over and over, because I was a flower girl from a sister, myself and my other sister that's next to me, who's 2 years older than me, we were both flower girls, and my older two sisters were bridesmaids. So we were all up on the altar. We were close to the altar. And we were kneeling either side of my sister who was getting married at a particular point in the ceremony. And I had become so fearful of where I was and all of that. I had become overwhelmed by the whole situation. And I fainted. I think about it now, my poor sister. But I fainted on the altar. But the interesting thing was that my other sister, who was on the other side, as the flower girl on the other side, also fainted. So I have this memory of the two of us being, helped to the side of either side of the church and being sat outside on chairs and trying to revive us. But to me, as a 12-year-old, that was such an overwhelming ordeal. And I had built it up in my mind so much that I had actually made it happen. That's my point, is I had made it happen because I was so fearful of it. Instead of, talking to somebody about it and saying how I felt and having someone else talk me through it and realize that, the only reason I was fearful of it was something I had never done before, and that everything would be fine, and that not everybody in the church is looking at me. The majority of the people were busy doing what they were doing, and probably none of them could even tell you what I had on or where I was in the church. But when we become so focused on our fear, we think all these unrealistic things about what's going on. And that makes us feel, the anxiety comes up straight away. And the anxiety about the whole, everybody's going to be looking at me. What am I going to do? What if I faint? And that's exactly what happened. So what I'm saying to you is, a lot of fear and anxiety, it's a response. First of all, we have an inbuilt fear response, which is there to keep us safe. These are the primal ones. And then we have a natural fear when we're unsure of events that we haven't been in before. But most of us will have the ability to cognitively make sense of what's going on and keep ourselves safe in that situation. And that will allow us to control the feelings of anxiety coming up fully. And so we can either decide to stay, we can decide to leave, we can decide we are going to be okay in this situation, and so on. If we don't have that ability, then we will straight away go back to our go-to primal response. And the brain will naturally do that because you aren't cognitively doing anything else to stop it from doing that. So I know this is a detailed subject, but it's one that a lot of people suffer with, and it's quite easy to overcome it. It's about dealing with it in a cognitive way, asking ourselves questions about the fear. Like, fear is really just us appraising the danger that we perceive, and anxiety is our emotional experience of the fear. So it's important to remember to think clearly and ask yourself questions. What am I thinking about this? What are my thoughts about this event coming up, or this thing that I'm going to be doing? And catching your thoughts about it and asking yourself, are those thoughts going to create a situation where I'm in control or out of control. If our thought is, the other thing we can do is ask ourselves, is there evidence to substantiate the thought we're having about that event in the future? Where is the evidence from? And how true is it? Is it logical? Or is it a response we're having? Recognize it as either a cognitive response or an actual experiencing of emotion response. And what proof do you have about what you believe is behind your anxiety? In other words, is your thought that you have, is it one that you've thought so many times that you now believe it? And if you believe it, is it one that is going to help you to deal with the situation, or is it one that is going to deter you from dealing with the situation? So is it a positive belief, or is it a limiting belief? Is it one that's going to hold you back from having control, or is it one that's going to give you positive control over your response to the situation? So it's about, for example, we might think that if we were up there doing a public talk, that everyone in the audience is analysing every word we say. For example, like me doing this live, that I would, stop myself from doing this because of fear and say, okay, people out there are going to think, who is she to tell me about fear? Who is she? What does she know? Or she doesn't know what she's talking about, or she's wrong about that, or whatever. We can have 1,000,001 thoughts and reasons not to do something. But the reality is different. If what I'm saying when I'm doing lives like this, in my mind, makes logical sense to me, and if it's something that I've experienced and I am sure I know I'm telling the truth, then it's my truth. But it may not be everyone else's out there that's listening to me. But that's okay. That's okay, because this is just me telling you my truth, my experience in life. And that's often, one of the biggest hurdles people face in talking in public is they fear that others are going to judge them. But the truth is, most people don't judge you. Most people listen. They take on board what they want to, and they leave aside things that I say or other people say when they're speaking publicly that they may or may not agree with. And that's being a cognitive, realistic listener, and one who's discerning about what they take on and what they don't take on. So if you're afraid to talk because of what others will say, then you will never talk. Because there'll always be somebody, somewhere, who disagrees with something out of all that you say. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be disparaging. That doesn't mean that they're going to, contact you and say, you're absolutely talking rubbish, or you need to stop talking like this, or whatever. It just means that there'll always be people who agree and there will always be people who disagree. And there's always a kernel of truth in everything that everybody says. And if you believe it, and if it's your experience and it's your truth, then you should speak it. If it's not their truth or their experience, that's fine. Do you know? It's about being logical here, guys. It's about realizing that everybody has the right to an opinion. Everyone has the right to voice their opinion. And everyone has the right to do whatever it is they want to do, whether that be public speaking, whether that be, being a mentor to somebody, or whether it's whatever you want to do. If you feel you're capable of doing it, you're qualified to do it, that you feel comfortable doing it, and you're in control of what you're saying, and you believe what you're saying and it's speaking from your heart and it's your truth, then that's all that matters. And inevitably, when you are speaking from your heart, you will speak to other people's hearts. And that means that you will have a positive impact on the people who need to hear what you're saying. Not everybody needs to hear what you're saying, but that's not the people you want to talk to anyway. The people you want to get to are the people who need to hear what you're saying, who needed to hear that anxiety can be controlled, for example, and that there is an answer, and that there is a way of dealing with it. And by working with somebody like me, a coach who is trained in CBT and various other helpful therapies that I use in tandem with CBT when I'm dealing with somebody in a session, that's, I know I have helped people with anxiety. I know I've helped people overcome many, many things and issues in their lives. That's all I need to know in order to believe in me. And that's all you need to know in order for you to believe in you as well. As in, if you believe you have something to offer, then get up and offer it in the world. Let's see, what else? I just had a load of notes written down here, that things that I wanted to say. You see, a lot of the time, people who suffer with anxiety are future pacing their lives and they're seeing the worst case scenario. So one of the things you can do to make a change to that is, instead of looking at the future and seeing worst case scenario, consciously say to yourself, what is the best case scenario? And you will find inevitably that the truth lies between those two extremes for most events and most things in your life. Not every talk is a disaster. Not every talk will be the best talk you ever gave. But you will find that there'll be parts of every talk that you felt good about and parts of every talk that you didn't feel so good about. But the hope is that by doing the talk, you will have reached somebody with some message that they need to hear. And you're also overcoming your own fear of doing the talk in the first place. So expect reality. You see, there's the worst case scenario, the best case scenario, and reality is somewhere in the middle, guys. Always, always. So another thing to think about is, what is the positive reason you feel anxious? What could be the possible reason you feel anxious? Because anxiety often is a warning system, an alarm to say, think about this. Think about what you're doing. And if by thinking about something, you do it slightly differently, that means you're more prepared for all eventualities, then that is a measured cognitive response to the future. And it's something which will benefit you when you come to actually deliver the talk or whatever it is that you're doing, because you'll have thought about the positive impact of what this is about and listen to it and cognitively work it out in your mind. Is this true? Is this anxious feeling true because it's trying to warn me that X, Y, and Z or whatever? There may be a positive reason for it. In most cases, there probably is. It's become exaggerated and it begins to kick into the fearful response. The other thing you can do is keep a journal of your thoughts. And by doing that, then you can look back on them and say, well, okay, are they fearful? Are they, how often are you having that thought? And is it true? Is it logical? Is it realistic? And all of that. Questioning yourself on that. What belief supports it? And is that belief a positive belief, which will be unlimiting in your life, or will it limit you in how you respond in the future? So it's about examining and exploring your thinking. Like, what proof is there that that outcome will happen? For example, is there some other way of looking at it? Is there an alternative view that is more realistic than fearful? And what's the worst that can happen? And if the worst did happen, what can you do? Or what can you do to prevent the worst from happening? So it's all about being prepared, really, to looking at the situation in a cold, hard, factual way, rather than allowing the anxiety to kickstart all the stressful reactions of palpitations and exaggerated breathing and sweating and fainting and all of the others. If you prepare for any event, then you will be prepared for any eventuality, and you will have already cognitively responded in advance to what you intend to do in relation to any given outcome. So really, guys, fear, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, really, because fear will kickstart at the four primal F's, as I said, and they are there to keep us safe. It has a positive purpose. Fear has a positive purpose. It's when it becomes in control of us rather than we control it, that we become out of control, and we start getting anxious and anxiety builds, and then we perceive every situation as an anxious situation, and we begin to think that that's all there is, and that we aren't able to cope in any situation. And if it really gets bad enough, we'll enter into an always situation in our mind, where we think that everything is always going to end up in the same way, and we won't be able to see any other eventuality other than worst case. That's what, if we allow it to get to that stage. And even if it does get to that stage, there's still a road back. So basically what I'm saying to you guys is there is an answer. There is a way of dealing with anxiety, and fear in itself is not a bad thing. If we didn't have our primal instincts, we wouldn't be kept safe. That's the main purpose of fear, is to keep us safe. And our hardwired thinking, as I say, about situations is so key to our response to fear. Has anyone any other questions about this, or are you suffering with this and you have a question about it, how you can help yourself in relation to it, or how CBT can help you, cognitive behavioural therapy? And basically cognitive behavioural therapy is breaking down what is perceived to be an uncontrolled response into you becoming controlled, the controller in your life. So it's about making you controller in your life rather than you being controlled by your feelings and your responses to things or reactions. See, there's a difference between reacting and responding. It's like if somebody says something nasty to us, it hurts, right? And if we're, like I used to be much more reactive when I was in the corporate world, in my job in the corporate world, years before I started down the road of spiritual exploration like I am doing now. And I was reactive. So if someone hurt me, the instinctive reaction was, well, say something nasty back or try to, get the upper hand or whatever. And that is our natural protection reaction. I've been hurt, I'll hurt back. Not always the way to go. In fact, it's probably never the way to go. What we should do is look at the response we can give, which would be more enlightening for me and more enlightening for the person who's hurt me. And if you take the time to do that, it is much more beneficial long term for everybody than if you naturally, instinctively allow yourself to react. That goes for everything in life. It's not always the way to go. Certainly in difficult relationships, which I've plenty of experience in my own life. If you add fuel to a fire, then that's going to burn, right? So if you instinctively fight back and react and allow your primal instincts to always be out there in control of you, that's reacting. That's reacting. That's not you being in control of yourself. When you learn how to respond rather than react, that's when you start to really learn more about yourself and more about other people around you. And it is far more beneficial for everybody if people didn't react but instead responded. And that's key to putting out any fire within a relationship, argument, disagreement, or whatever within a relationship or within a communication with another person. So it's never, knee-jerk reaction never results in a solution, is what I'm trying to say. Nothing is resolved by reacting. The only way to finding a solution, which is best for both people, is to respond effectively rather than react. So that's the difference between using a reaction or a response, and it's the same with fear and anxiety. Our reaction to fear, our fear is a reaction to an uncontrolled situation, which we perceive in our thoughts as being out of our control. So straight away we have the 4 F's kicked in. Once they kick in, and if we don't take control at that stage and start getting cognitively in control of the 4 F's, then it will propel itself into full-blown anxiety attack. In which case we're now out of control of our own response. We now aren't responding, we're now reacting, continually 100% in reaction mode. And that's never going to lead to a solution. So I hope something I've said triggered you to think about something more deeply in your life, that perhaps you've been experiencing forms of anxiety in your life, and this will allow you have a kernel of thought in relation to something that's happening for you in your life. And as I say, if you do have excessive bouts of anxiety, then CBT is a really fast therapy for coping with anxiety. In 8 to 12 weeks, you can overcome anxiety disorder. So thanks for listening, guys. And if you have any questions about anything that you want me to talk about, if, for example, you have something going on in your life and you don't know how to get out of it, or you would like my spiritual view on, or my therapeutic view on how you could respond to that situation in your life in a better way and find a solution for you, then by all means do private message me on Facebook, and I will bring up the topic, the general topic of the content of what your situation is about. I won't be giving your name or anything about you or saying who it is about, because as you see in all the other lives that I've done here in the series, I've said I've had clients who've come to me with X, Y and Z issues, and so nobody knows who the question arose from. And so feel free to contact me, Facebook me privately, tell me your situation, allow us to have a conversation about it, and then I will do a live about it in order for me to hopefully give you some help and find your answers, your truth in relation to that situation. So this is all about finding your truth. I'm doing these lives, giving you my responses to everyday life situations in the hopes that it may trigger your own thought process in responding to your particular situation in your life. Thank you for listening and joining me, Suzanne, and anyone else who's joined throughout tonight's live. And I will be back next Tuesday for another Finding Your Truth live, when I'll be talking about what other people have sent me, or what you may have sent me in the week in between, about what's happening in your life and how I can help you to find your truth in relation to that issue. So enjoy the rest of the night, guys, and I will see you, if not before, if not then, if I certainly see you next Tuesday. And if I don't see you next Tuesday, or you don't join me next Tuesday, I'll probably see you before then, is what I'm trying to say, because I'll be live in between this and then, and possibly doing an angel readings. Or if you have something that you would like me to do also contact me and let me know. All right, guys, have a wonderful night, and I'll see you all next week and before. Take care. Bye.